The bang shook the whole cul-de-sac, loud, metallic, and angry enough to send every dog in Cedar Ridge Meadows into a barking frenzy. I knew that sound. It was the unmistakable slam of my garage door, followed by the click of 3 deadbolts being thrown in rapid fire. I stepped outside just in time to see my father, Hank Cole, standing proudly in front of our now sealed garage, jaw clenched, arms crossed, and eyes blazing with the righteous fury of a man who's fought both wars and HOAs. Inside that garage, 3 massive HOA trucks that the neighborhood tyrant, Lauren Pierce, had smugly parked there without permission, waving some temporary ordinance she practically invented on the spot. So Hank did what any sane, retired veteran with a zero-tolerance policy for nonsense would do. He locked the door and called the sheriff. What I didn't know then was that those 3 trucks would expose the biggest suburban scandal our town had ever seen. Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there, and if you've ever faced a crazy HOA, hit subscribe so you don't miss how this all unfolds. I didn't grow up imagining I'd one day be trapped in an HOA drama that felt like a cross between a spy thriller and a comedy special, but life has a strange sense of humor. My name is Ethan Cole, 45, IT consultant, father of 2, proud owner of a grill big enough to cook for a small army, and a man who genuinely believed that living in a quiet suburban neighborhood would be peaceful. For the first few years, it actually was. Cedar Ridge Meadows had everything you'd expect. Trimmed lawns, friendly nods from neighbors, kids riding bikes in lazy circles, and the occasional HOA newsletter reminding us to avoid planting aggressively colored flowers. I used to laugh at that one. Little did I know we weren't even scratching the surface of what Lauren Pierce had planned. Lauren became HOA president the same year. My father, Hank, moved in with us. That timing was what we like to call a cosmic prank. Dad was a 72-year-old retired Army mechanic, with enough stories, opinions, and homemade weapons to start a small rebellion. He hated pointless authority, and Lauren lived and breathed it. She was the embodiment of HOA perfectionism. Sharp bob haircut that never moved, bright lipstick that made her look permanently surprised, and a clipboard attached to her hand like it was surgically fused. She walked through the neighborhood as if she were conducting inspections for the Pentagon. At first, her rules were merely annoying. Notes on doors, reminders about trash bins, a passive-aggressive suggestion about my mailbox, needing a more neutral tone. But the day she decided to escalate from petty annoyances to territorial conquest began with something deceptively harmless. Muffins. I came home one Tuesday to find a small white bakery box on my doorstep. Tied with a bow, I opened it, expecting a welcome treat. Maybe a neighbor baking out of boredom. Instead, I found 6 blueberry muffins that looked dry enough to be used as emergency building material, and a note taped to the inside of the lid. Friendly reminder, your trash bins remained visible for longer than permitted. Also, per temporary ordinance 47, B, the HOA will be using your garage this week for equipment storage. Much appreciated. Lauren. I stood there, staring at it, confused. Hank was behind me, squinting like the note had personally insulted his military service. She's testing you, he muttered. First it's the muffins, then it's the garage. Next thing you know, she'll be holding town hall meetings in your living room. I laughed it off, because that's what normal people do when confronted with something ridiculous. Hank didn't. He paced the kitchen, chewing a toothpick like he was sharpening it for battle. This is territory, son. She's measuring how far she can push you. You give an inch, she'll take the whole house. I thought he was exaggerating. I thought the muffins were weird, but not dangerous. I thought maybe she genuinely needed extra storage because the clubhouse was being renovated. Turns out, the only thing being renovated was my sense of security. The next morning, the trucks arrived. Not 1, not 2, but 3 hulking, industrial-grade trucks that looked like they belonged to a secret government division or a traveling circus of surveillance equipment. They rolled down the street in a slow, rumbling procession before turning into my driveway like they owned the place. The engines idled there for a moment, deep and growling, like they were warming up for something sinister. Then came Lauren. She stepped out of her white Lexus, dressed in a bold magenta blazer and heels that clicked like a countdown timer. She waved cheerfully, as if this were a casual neighborhood favor, instead of a blatant invasion of privacy. "Oh, Ethan, wonderful. They'll only be in there a few days," she said, gesturing toward the trucks. HOA equipment overflow, you understand? Understand? No, I did not. One of the driver's big guy, no smile, walked up and held out a clipboard. Garage code, he said. I opened my mouth to protest, but Lauren cut in. It's all approved, temporary ordinance 47B. Don't worry, this is standard procedure. Hank appeared behind me like a ghost summoned by nonsense. Approved by who? He demanded. By me, Lauren said sweetly, as acting HOA president. The drivers didn't wait for permission. They walked straight to my garage, tapped in the code Lauren apparently knew by heart, and rolled all 3 trucks inside bumper to bumper, filling every inch of space. For the first time since I'd moved here, Hank was speechless. He stood there, blinking, jaw tightening. 2 full minutes passed. Then he turned to me slowly and said the 5 words that would change everything. Get me the locks, son. I should have stopped him. Any responsible adult would have said something like, let's call a lawyer, or maybe we should discuss this. But Hank wasn't just my father. He was a man who once defused a grenade using duct tape and a fishing lure. When someone like that asks for padlocks, you bring them padlocks. It's simply nature. He got to work with a precision that would have impressed NASA. Manual locks, electronic locks, chains, a metal bar wedged horizontally across the inside handles, zip ties, then more zip ties. He sealed that garage as if preparing for a zombie apocalypse. When he finished, he wiped his hands on a rag, nodded with satisfaction, and said, let's see her ordinance override that. And then Lauren returned. She strutted up the driveway as if she were walking into court to defend her honor. Jack, she always got Hank's name wrong. Those trucks are HOA property. You can't legally, but Hank had already lifted the phone to his ear. Yeah, Sheriff Ramsey? I've got 3 unauthorized vehicles on my private property. Might be an attempted hostile takeover. Hard to say these days. Lauren's smile cracked like old paint. Cedar Ridge Meadows doesn't often witness police involvement. The wildest thing to happen before this was when Old Man Trumbley's goat escaped its pen and led 3 police cars on a slow chase around the fountain. So when the sheriff's cruiser pulled up, everyone came outside like it was a parade. Sheriff Doug Ramsey stepped out, holding his coffee like it was the only stable thing in his life. He looked at Hank, at me, at the massive locked garage, then at Lauren, who was clutching her folder of printed HOA regulations like a life raft. Well, he said, sighing, looks like I walked into another homeowner's turf war. Lauren launched into a speech about authority, ordinances, and community compliance. Hank interrupted her with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. They're trucks, Sheriff. My garage is not a depot. My son is not a warehouse manager. And no one asked permission. Doug scratched his head and said the magic words. Ma'am, unless you have signed consent, you can't store HOA property on private land, even under HOA rules. Lauren looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. She left that day with clenched fists and trembling rage, but the trucks stayed exactly where they were, and that was the moment Cedar Ridge Meadows crossed the line from suburbia into battlefield. Hank didn't say much for the rest of that day, which was usually a sign that the gears in his head were spinning fast enough to power the entire neighborhood. I kept expecting him to crack a joke, pour a beer, mutter about bureaucrats with too much free time, something, anything. But he was quiet, focused. The kind of quiet that happens right before a storm rolls in. I should have known he wasn't done. Not even close. That night, the neighborhood was buzzing like a kicked beehive. People walked their dogs extra slowly past my driveway, trying to peek at the locked garage without looking like they were trying to peek. Someone on the community Facebook group posted, rumor. Sheriff was called because HOA tried to store a SWAT truck in someone's garage. Anyone know more? The comments exploded instantly. Hank was already a neighborhood legend, but after this, he'd become folklore. But while everyone else was gossiping, Hank was standing in the kitchen with the lights off, staring out the window like a man waiting for an ambush. She'll come back, he muttered. Lauren? I asked. No, Hank said. The queen lizard herself. I laughed. Big mistake. You think I'm joking, son? People like her don't accept failure. They regroup, they retaliate, they slither. You're being dramatic. You'll see. I saw sooner than I thought. Around midnight, I heard a faint metallic clink outside. Not loud, not bold, sneaky. The kind of sound that makes your spine straighten before your brain even understands why. I nudged Hank awake. Dad, someone's out there. He didn't grab a flashlight, or a phone, or a weapon. No. He grabbed the remote for our motion-triggered sprinkler system, something he installed after watching raccoons steal tomatoes with military-level coordination, as he put it. We crept to the window together, and there she was, Lauren Pierce, HOA president, in all her glory, except instead of her usual power blazer and heels, she wore black leggings, a hoodie, and latex gloves. She looked like a burglar from a low-budget sitcom. She crouched by the garage, struggling with a bolt cutter that was almost as big as she was. Every time she squeezed the handles, she grunted like she was lifting a car. Hank whispered, "Activate countermeasures." I pressed the button. The sprinklers erupted with the force of a broken fire hydrant. A jet of water blasted Lauren directly in the face, launching her backward onto the driveway with a scream that echoed down the entire block. She hit the ground, slid in a puddle, flailed like a fish, then scrambled up and sprinted away in soggy defeat. Hank nodded approvingly. "Textbook retreat," he said. By morning, the entire neighborhood knew what had happened. Someone had caught the whole sprinkler incident on a Ring camera, and by 9 a.m., it was circulating with the caption, "Operation Karen Wash." I even saw someone wearing a homemade t-shirt that said, "Team Hank," in big blue letters. Lauren, however, was not amused. She marched to her car, soaked, humiliated, and angrier than I'd ever seen a human look without spontaneously combusting. When she drove off, her tires screeched so loudly, I'm pretty sure she broke a noise ordinance she herself had written. I should have been satisfied, but the thing about chaos is that it doesn't end when the noise stops. Sometimes it just gets quieter and weirder. The trucks stayed locked in the garage all day. The more I thought about them, the stranger it felt. HOA, equipment storage. Why 3 trucks? Why unmarked? Why did the drivers look like they'd been trained to avoid eye contact at all costs? By evening, curiosity finally ate through my patience. "Dad," I said, "we should at least look inside one of those trucks." Hank didn't hesitate. "Damn right we should." We went to the garage, turned off the lights so Lauren wouldn't see shadows from her window, and carefully cracked open the back of the middle truck. What we found was not equipment. It was a full-blown surveillance command center. Monitors stacked like a miniature NASA launch room, storage cases labeled audio, drawers filled with lenses, wires, and cameras disguised as everything from rocks to garden ornaments. A rack of small receivers blinked a soft blue light. The air smelled like cold metal and new plastic, sterile, unnervingly clean. Hank froze, then let out a low whistle. "Well, son, either she's starting a reality show, or we just opened Pandora's toolbox." I sifted through a stack of thick manila folders. Each one had a name on it. Neighbors' names, Mendoza, fence, Harper, noise, Nguyen, parking discrepancies. Each file contained photos taken from bizarre angles, some clearly from yards, others from windows. Notes scribbled in sharp, relentless handwriting, schedules, personal details no HOA had any business knowing. I felt my stomach drop. "Dad, this is insane." He nodded slowly. "This ain't HOA business. This is leverage. This is control." We kept digging. One drawer was filled with SD cards labeled by house number. Another had printed logs of entries, violations, behavioral notes. This wasn't management, it was profiling. Then I found the folder with my name, Cole, priority category. Inside was a typed sheet listing, history of minor resistance, potential influencer among residents, garage access ideal for storage. Hank read over my shoulder. "Well, I'll be damned. They've classified you as a threat. That's not funny. Oh, it's hilarious. But not for the reasons you think." We closed the truck, resecured the locks, and stepped back into the night air. Hank cracked his knuckles like he'd just discovered the final clue in a detective novel. "This is bigger than your garage, Ethan. Bigger than my patience, and definitely bigger than Lauren's clipboard." I rubbed my forehead. "So, what do we do?" Hank's eyes gleamed with a mixture of battle readiness and mischief, the same look he gave when he taught me how to hotwire a tractor at age 12. "We gather intel, we stack evidence, then we bring her down the right way." I stared at him. "The right way?" He nodded, publicly, loudly, and with at least half the neighborhood watching. It was that moment I knew things were about to go completely off the rails. A simple dispute over garage space had spiraled into something darker, stranger, and far more dangerous. I felt both terrified and oddly energized. like I'd just been drafted into a suburban rebellion. But before we could confront Lauren, we needed one thing: proof. Undeniable, irrefutable proof. We spent the next hour transferring photos to my laptop, documenting everything and planning next steps. Hank scribbled ideas on the back of an old grocery receipt: arrows, names, theories, and what I swear might have been a crude sketch of Lauren as a snake. "It's all about control," he muttered. "She wants eyes everywhere, leverage on everyone. She's not running an HOA, she's running an intelligence agency." "Why, though?" I asked. Hank shrugged. "Power, ego, a deep fear of dandelions. Who knows? But one thing was certain: if we didn't stop her, no one else would." As we shut down the operation for the night, Hank put a hand on my shoulder. "Son, tomorrow morning we're going to that emergency HOA meeting, and we're bringing everything with us." I felt my pulse quicken. "You think they'll listen?" Hank grinned. "Not at first, but once we show them what's inside those trucks, Lauren's little empire is going to crack like a bad sidewalk." Little did we know that crack was an understatement. What we were about to uncover would shatter Cedar Ridge Meadows from the inside out. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for 6 p.m. sharp the next day, but Hank insisted we show up at 5:30 to secure advantageous seating. I wasn't sure what that meant until we arrived at the Cedar Ridge Community Center and discovered he'd placed 2 folding chairs dead center in the front row prime, viewing for whatever chaos was about to unfold. He'd even slapped sticky notes onto them that said, "Reserved, presenting evidence." I swallowed hard. "Dad, this feels dramatic." He adjusted his sunglasses indoors and replied, "Drama is inevitable when truth is on the offensive." By 5:55, the place was packed. Every resident who'd seen the sheriff's cruiser yesterday had shown up, along with the residents who'd heard rumors. From the residents who'd heard rumors, folding chairs filled the room in tight semicircular rows. A banner stretched across the front wall: "Community first, preserving order in our neighborhood." Hank scoffed when he read it. At exactly 5:59, the door swung open with unnecessary force, and in swept Lauren Pierce herself. She wore a navy blue pantsuit sharp enough to cut glass, heels that clicked like a countdown, and a stack of papers thick enough to be mistaken for a doctoral thesis. Her hair was styled into a caramel-colored helmet. She took her place behind the podium with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good evening, residents of Cedar Ridge Meadows," she said, voice sugary but stiff. "We are gathered here to address a matter of urgent community importance." Hank leaned toward me and whispered, "Translation? She's about to incriminate herself." Lauren cleared her throat dramatically. "As many of you have heard, certain residents are currently," she paused, glaring directly at us, "detaining HOA property and disrupting community operations through unlawful obstruction." There were murmurs across the room. Someone whispered, "Is she talking about the trucks?" Someone else whispered back, "Obviously." Lauren continued, flipping through her mountain of papers. "Per HOA Ordinance 47B, the association reserves the right to utilize resident properties temporarily for equipment overflow. This has been exercised without issue in the past. However, certain individuals have." Hank raised his hand, didn't wait to be called on, just stood up like he was interrupting a kindergarten puppet show. "Excuse me, Madam President, but that ordinance you're waving around like a magic wand was voted down in 2012. Lauren froze. "That's not possible." Hank pulled a laminated sheet from his jacket pocket and held it up like a lawyer unveiling Exhibit A. "I've got the minutes from the 2012 vote, right here. Hung this baby on my fridge for years. Pure nostalgia." People leaned forward, squinting. Lauren blinked rapidly, something her face wasn't built to do. "Well, even if that were true, it is true," Hank cut in. "You can't rewrite history just because you bought a fresh pack of toner." A few people chuckled. Lauren's smile thinned. Before she could regain control of the room, I stood up too. My heart thudded like a marching band inside my chest. "And if storage was all you needed," I said, "why send 3 unmarked trucks? Why fill them with surveillance equipment?" The room fell silent. For a split second, you could have heard a dandelion seed hit the carpet. Lauren swallowed. "What equipment?" I pulled out the printed photos, grainy but unmistakable, and held them high. Cameras disguised as birdhouses, microphones hidden in lawn ornaments, files with people's names on them, schedules, notes, gasps. Lots of gasps. Someone in the second row shouted, "Is that my mailbox in that picture?" Lauren's face twitched. Those are legal inspection tools, strictly visual, used to ensure compliance and safety. Hank barked a laugh. "Lady, no one volunteers their personal secrets to the HOA. And yet, somehow you've got 'em." He scanned the room and raised his voice. "Does anyone here voluntarily report their neighbors?" Silence. Everyone looked at everyone else. Nope, no one was admitting to anything. I stepped forward. "We're not saying you can't run an HOA, but spying on us, collecting data, that's not management, that's surveillance," Lauren snapped. "You don't understand the pressure of maintaining order. If people followed the rules, I wouldn't have to take extra measures." Extra measures. The room repeated those words like they were tasting something sour. "Lauren," I said slowly, "you parked 3 trucks filled with spy gear in my garage without permission, and then tried to break in at midnight," Hank added. "Clumsy attempt, by the way, 10 out of 10 entertainment value." A ripple of laughter rolled through the crowd. Lauren's eye twitched hard enough to move her bangs. She attempted to recover. "We will give the Cole household 48 hours to release HOA property before we pursue legal action and fines." "Oh," Hank said, leaning back like he owned the place. "Well, I've got something to show you." He pulled out a second stack of photos, this time printed in color, and started handing them to the front row. People passed them backward like they were sharing contraband at school. "Those," Hank said, "are pictures of the inside of your trucks, which contain evidence of illegal surveillance. Which means those trucks aren't yours anymore. They're evidence." You could watch the shift in the room happen in real time. First confusion, then realization, then outrage. Pure, unfiltered, suburban outrage. Someone shouted, "She knew about my dog barking at 3 a.m. How? Another person? She fined me for a crack in my driveway that nobody could see from the street." Another, "She knew my son skipped football practice. How did she know that?" Lauren tried to speak over them, but the crowd had gone full mutiny. The HOA board members sitting behind her slowly scooted their chairs away, like they didn't want to be within splash radius when she exploded. Then it got worse for her. A figure in the back row stood up, a quiet woman I barely recognized. "Lauren," she said softly, "stop lying." The room froze. It was Julia Reyes, Lauren's former assistant, the one who resigned for personal reasons a few months earlier. "I helped her," Julia said, voice trembling but steady. "I set up the equipment, I filed the notes, I kept the backups, and I brought copies." You could feel the oxygen leave the building. Julia held up a flash drive. "This has everything. The emails, the logs, the financial reports. She wasn't just monitoring us. She sold the data. Insurance companies, real estate agencies, even a political campaign." Lauren's face drained of all color. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out, like someone had unplugged her from the power source. Sheriff Ramsey, who had been sitting quietly near the back with his coffee, finally stood. "Well now," he said, "that explains the trucks." Lauren bolted. Literally bolted. She shoved her papers aside, stormed out the back door, and vanished into the parking lot like a fleeing cartoon villain. The room exploded with voices, questions, theories, accusations, but Hank raised his hands and yelled, "Settle down, this ain't over yet, but we've taken the first step." And he was right. The war wasn't over, not even close, but the Queen's armor had cracked. Later, as we walked home, Hank said something that stuck with me. "Son, people like Lauren, they don't go quietly. Tonight was just the opening act." He was right. The storm had only begun. Hank wasn't the type to let momentum fade. The moment we got home from the HOA disaster meeting, he marched straight into the living room, turned on every lamp like we were interrogating the furniture, and announced, "Operation Clean Sweep begins now." I blinked. "Operation what?" He waved a hand impatiently. "A working title, we'll workshop it. Point is, we're setting up command." And he did. In less than 10 minutes, our coffee table was covered in photos, printed documents, sticky notes, and a 3-foot-long piece of twine Hank insisted on using to connect related clusters of misconduct. He moved around the room with the energy of someone 25 years younger, muttering to himself like a detective on the verge of solving a cold case. At one point, he held up a photo of a lawn gnome with a tiny lens in its hat. "See this? This is not decoration. This is tyranny disguised as whimsy." I just stared at him. "Dad, are you sure you're okay?" "Better than okay," he said, tapping his temple. I'm activated. I wasn't sure if that meant he was mentally preparing for battle or entering a dangerous new hobby, but either way, it looked too late to stop him. Meanwhile, I sat and scrolled through the dozens of images we had taken from inside the trucks. The more I looked, the more unsettled I felt. Lauren hadn't just been running an overzealous HOA, she had built a miniature intelligence network. Cameras disguised as bird feeders, microphones hidden inside decorative rocks, a sprinkler head with a pinhole lens, and the notes. God, the notes. Resident consistently returns home after 11 p.m., possible unreported pets, frequent visitors monitor for pattern, mortgage late, twice potential leverage. Leverage? That word appeared again and again. Lauren wasn't just enforcing rules, she was gathering ammunition, collecting weaknesses, compiling vulnerabilities. Hank leaned over my shoulder. She's building dossiers, he said, voice low. This is what intelligence agencies do when they want to control a population. Dad, this is a suburb, not a covert operation. He pointed at the screen. Tell that to the woman who put cameras in frogs. Fair point. Hank slapped both hands on the table. All right, phase 2. Phase 2. Of what? He grinned. Of making sure the whole neighborhood knows exactly what Lauren's been up to. I rubbed my temples. Dad, they already know she's a maniac. Not enough? He said. We need irreversible proof, incontrovertible evidence, publicly displayed, and we need her to incriminate herself. That stopped me. You want her to, what? Leave a confession in our mailbox. Hank actually considered it. No, too direct. We need bait, something she won't resist, something that'll make her show her true colors. I leaned back in my chair. What do people like Lauren crave most? Hank didn't even hesitate. Control. The illusion of control. Anything that threatens her power will send her running right into our trap. And that's when the idea was born. A decoy. A violation too juicy for her to ignore. A scenario she would have to respond to. We needed accomplices, and for that, Hank had a plan. We're bringing in the Marshalls, he said. The Marshalls, George and Betty, were a retired couple who lived at the corner lot, sweet as sugar, harmless, and perpetually wearing matching beige outfits. They loved knitting, gardening, and absolutely any opportunity to feel included. They also hated conflict, which made them the perfect bait. People Lauren had long assumed were obedient, quiet, and easily manipulated. We walked over that afternoon. Betty opened the door, holding a plate of lemon bars like she'd been expecting company. Oh, hello, dears. Come in. I just put on a kettle of tea. Hank stepped inside without waiting. Betty, George, how do you feel about helping take down a petty suburban dictator? Betty blinked. Is this another raccoon situation, Hank? No, he said. Worse. We explained the plan, or at least Hank did, with visual aids he'd drawn on the back of a junk mail envelope. The Marshalls listened, sipping tea, eyes wide. So, George said slowly, you want us to break HOA rules. Just a little? Hank replied. To help expose Lauren. Betty gasped. Oh my, I've never broken a rule in my life. Hank patted her hand. That's why you'll be perfect at it. Lauren will never suspect a thing. Eventually, after repeated assurances that no one would be fined and the sheriff would not arrest them for flamingo possession, they agreed. The next day, Operation Neighborhood Watchdog officially launched. Step 1, trash cans. The Marshalls were instructed to leave their bins at the curb for 3 days straight. Something Betty said felt like streaking naked down Main Street. Step 2, inflatable flamingo. We installed a massive hot pink flamingo in their yard, wearing sunglasses, smiling like a mischievous cartoon character. Inside, the sunglasses was a microcam pointing straight at the walkway. Step 3, watering violations. Their sprinklers ran outside the approved hours, which in our HOA was basically any time water dared to move. By noon, half the neighborhood was whispering. By 2 p.m., someone had posted on the Facebook group, "Are the Marshalls okay?" Lauren was going to take the bait. We just had to wait. But Hank wasn't finished. This only gets us the reaction, he said. We still need the smoking gun. And that meant infiltrating the source of her power, her home office, a garage she had converted into what we suspected was her personal command post. We couldn't break in without cause, but we could break in while the entire neighborhood was distracted. And oh, Lauren gave us the perfect opportunity. She announced a disco night HOA fundraiser for Friday. Classic misdirection, classic Lauren. Hank smirked. Perfect. While the queen hosts her ball, we storm the castle. We needed a team. Enter Dawson, former stage magician, current locksmith hobbyist, proud owner of 12 paperclips he could turn into universal keys. Nia, 21, fearless, recently viral on TikTok for sneaking her emotional support goose. General Honk, past airport security. Dee, the legendary cat lady of Cedar Ridge Meadows, whose 11 felines had earned her 15 fines in 3 years, most of them handed out by Lauren personally. These were not heroes Cedar Ridge Meadows deserved, but they were the heroes we had. Friday came. The community center pulsed with colored lights. Lauren showed up in silver bell-bottom pants that looked like they had been tailored out of antenna material. People pretended to dance. General Honk honked aggressively in rhythm. It was beautiful chaos. Meanwhile, our infiltration team slipped away. Nia and the goose took lookout duty. Dawson picked the lock with a paperclip and a bobby pin. Dee held a flashlight in her mouth and muttered curses about HOA tyranny. Inside Lauren's garage, the truth finally yanked off its mask. Blueprints of every house in the neighborhood lined the walls, color-coded violation maps, a whiteboard titled Priority Targets, a locked filing cabinet quickly conquered by Dawson. Inside were spreadsheets tracking fines that had mysteriously never appeared on HOA financial reports, receipts for disguised surveillance equipment labeled Community Artistry, emails discussing data packages with insurance companies, and a USB drive labeled Insurance L. Pierce Only. We took everything, photographed everything, copied everything, and then we slipped back into the disco as if we'd just finished an innocent bathroom break. The trap was almost ready, but Hank wanted one more thing. A final act of bait so obvious, Lauren wouldn't be able to resist touching it. That's when he created the fake developer letter, the one suggesting I was selling my home to a construction company, planning a duplex. We placed it in plain sight at the Marshall's trash bin, Lauren's favorite browsing destination. Sure enough, that night, the Flamingo camera caught her creeping, rifling through their trash, finding the letter, scanning it with a pocket light, photographing it, and stalking away with the determination of someone who believed destiny was on her side. The next morning, we woke up to a fresh HOA violation notice taped to our door, accusing us of structural instability, unauthorized property alterations, and failure to notify the HOA of pending sale. That was it. We had her, caught, documented, on video. Hank clapped me on the back and said, "Son, tomorrow we bring the whole kingdom crashing down." And for the first time since this madness began, I believed him. The sun hadn't even risen when Hank started setting up equipment in the backyard: extension cords, a portable projector, 2 coolers stacked to form a makeshift podium, and our old camping lanterns in case the meeting stretched past dusk. He moved with a level of enthusiasm no 72-year-old should legally possess. I followed him, half awake, clutching my coffee like a life preserver. "Dad, the community meeting isn't until 3, I reminded him. He waved me off. "Public uprisings require preparation. You don't show up late to a revolution." Revolution was a strong word, but after everything we'd uncovered, it didn't feel entirely inaccurate. Cedar Ridge Meadows had spent years living under Lauren's thumb. People whispered instead of speaking up. They paid fines without questioning them. They lived in quiet fear of a woman wielding a clipboard. But now, the spell had cracked, and the entire neighborhood was ready to see behind the curtain. By noon, my phone was vibrating non-stop. When's the meeting? Should we bring chairs? Is it true Lauren stole people's personal data? My husband wants to bring snacks. Is that appropriate for a rebellion? I texted back, yes, absolutely. Snacks were appropriate for any uprising. When 3 o'clock rolled around, the park looked like a suburban festival. People arrived with foldable chairs, juice boxes, homemade signs that said "No more spyware" in the sprinklers, and enough lemonade to hydrate a small militia. Even Sheriff Ramsey came off duty, wearing jeans and a faded t-shirt, carrying a lawn chair under one arm and an iced tea in the other. Hank stood beside our 2-cooler podium, arms crossed, sunglasses on. "This is it," he whispered. "Time to dethrone the queen." I cleared my throat and stepped forward. "Everyone, thanks for coming." The crowd quieted. A few kids shuffled to the front. Someone's dog barked once, then sat. I continued. Yesterday's emergency HOA meeting showed us what we've all suspected for years, that the rules weren't the problem. The person enforcing them was murmurs, nods. One very dramatic gasp from a woman in the third row. Today, I said, we're going to show you exactly what Lauren has been doing. Not rumors, not suspicions, proof. I clicked the projector on. The first image flashed onto the screen, a photograph of the inside of one of Lauren's trucks. The crowd collectively inhaled. I heard someone whisper, "Oh my Lord and all his angels." Then more images, rows of hidden cameras, cables, listening devices, GPS trackers, disguised lawn ornaments with glowing pinhole lenses. People shifted uncomfortably. It was one thing to suspect an HOA president was overstepping. It was another to see that she'd built a covert surveillance network worthy of a crime thriller, I continued. We found files in those trucks, files with your names on them. I clicked again. A sample folder appeared on the screen. Notes, timestamps, observations that no HOA should ever possess. This isn't neighborly oversight, I said. This is spying. A man raised his hand. What about the fines? She always seemed to know when my dog barked. At 3 a.m, nobody is awake then except raccoons. She was always awake, someone muttered. I nodded. She knew because she was watching, or listening. A wave of realization swept over the park. People murmured to each other, voices rising with outrage and disbelief. Some residents who'd been fined unfairly cursed under their breath. Others looked ready to march straight to Lauren's house with pitchforks shaped like garden tools. Sheriff Ramsey raised his iced tea and said, "Folks, what the Coles found, this is serious. I've seen less surveillance and actual police sting operations." That helped anchor the moment. People needed to hear it wasn't just pettiness, this was a real violation. I swallowed and clicked to the next slide. This is what she kept in her home office. Photos of Lauren's garage turned command center filled the screen. Blueprints, violation matrices, financial logs with missing funds, a whiteboard titled priority targets, with names listed in color-coded categories. Every time a new slide appeared, the crowd reacted louder, whispers turning to outbursts, outbursts turning to full voices. Then, Hank took the stage, and the park fell silent. He stepped up to the podium, cleared his throat, and spoke in the slow, deliberate voice of a man who'd once briefed commanders in desert heat. "You've all lived under Lauren's thumb," he said. "You know the petty notes, the unfair fines, the rules that didn't make sense unless you remembered who wrote them." A few people chuckled darkly. "But none of you deserve this level of intrusion." He gestured at the screen behind us. This wasn't management. It was control, fear, manipulation. She built a system that watched you, judged you, and held leverage over you. He paused, letting the words settle, and people like that, they don't stop until someone stops them. Hank stepped aside. "Ethan," he said, "show them the final piece." My hands shook slightly as I pulled out a single photo, the one taken by the Flamingo camera. "This," I said, "is Lauren illegally accessing a neighbor's mailbox." Gasps. Someone yelled, "That's a felony." I nodded. She did it to enforce violations based on information she had no right to access. She used that letter, I held up the fake developer document, to accuse us of property violations. She didn't know it was bait. A few residents laughed. One clapped. Then I said, "We have the footage, we have the files, we have the financial logs, and we have a witness." Everyone turned when Julia Reyes, Lauren's former assistant, stepped forward. Her voice trembled, but her resolve did not. "Everything you saw today is true," she said. "Lauren asked me to help her. I didn't understand how far she planned to go. When I realized, I left. I kept backups of everything to protect myself, but I'm giving them to you now." She held up a folder thick with printouts and a USB drive. People erupted, clapping, cheering, thanking her. The atmosphere transformed from outrage to empowerment. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years exchanged looks of camaraderie. Those who had once been intimidated were now emboldened. And then the final blow landed. A deep voice spoke from the back. "I've seen enough," Sheriff Ramsey said, stepping forward. This crossed into criminal territory. As if on cue, a white sedan pulled into the parking lot. 2 men wearing dark suits stepped out, quiet, composed, unmistakably federal. Someone whispered, "Those are FBI suits," Hank muttered. "Told you this was bigger than trash bins." The agents approached the group calmly. "We're looking for Lauren Pierce." People pointed. She stood frozen near the back of the crowd, face pale, mouth slightly open like a statue caught mid-denial. "We need to speak with you," one agent said. showing a badge, regarding unauthorized surveillance, data misuse, and federal privacy violations. Lauren finally found her voice, but only enough for one word. No. She turned and tried to run. She didn't make it 2 steps. The agents caught her gently but firmly, guiding her toward the car as the entire neighborhood watched in stunned silence. No handcuffs, no shouting, just a quiet, inevitable end to a reign built on fear. As the sedan drove away, a hush fell over Cedar Ridge Meadows. Then, slowly, applause began soft at first, then loud, unified, cathartic. Hank put a hand on my shoulder. "Son," he said, "that's the sound of a neighborhood waking up." But he wasn't smiling. Not fully, because we both knew something important. When a queen falls, the kingdom doesn't heal overnight. And Lauren's shadow was long enough that even with her gone, we had no idea what the days ahead would bring. For the first time in what felt like months, the neighborhood slept peacefully that night. No one received surprise notices taped to their doors. No one heard the sound of an SUV creeping slowly down the street at 2 a.m. No one felt the prickling sensation of being watched from behind a curtain. Lauren was gone, escorted out of Cedar Ridge Meadows by federal agents, and the entire community exhaled in relief. But the relief didn't last long. I woke the next morning to the sound of Hank humming. The man rarely hummed unless he was working on something dangerous or ill-advised. I stumbled into the kitchen, rubbing my eyes, and found him spreading maps across the table like a general planning a siege. "Morning, son," he said brightly. "Coffee's on the counter. Don't spill it, we've got work to do." I blinked. "Dad?" "Lauren was arrested last night. We actually won. What work could possibly be left?" He tapped the map. It wasn't a map of the neighborhood. It was a printed screenshot of Cedar Ridge's private Facebook group, a group with a new post, a new anonymous post written in a suspiciously familiar tone. It read, "Reminder to residents, decorative items must conform to uniform standards. Excessive displays may result in penalties." A second appeared minutes later. "Unauthorized modifications to yards will be recorded. Compliance is mandatory." I stared at them. "Dad, you don't think?" "Oh, I think," he said, "she's not done, but she's gone. They took her away." Hank snorted. "Son, you ever try to stop a bureaucrat with a grudge? They don't go quietly, they go underground." He pointed to the wall. There, taped beside our old calendar, was something new. A set of printouts from our outdoor security camera. They showed a faint shape in the sky the night before. "A drone, not one of ours," Hank said, "and it wasn't flying until after she left." A shiver moved down my spine. "But she can't use HOA equipment anymore. She doesn't have access." "You saw what she had in those trucks," Hank said. "Lori Pierce doesn't need the HOA to be dangerous. All she needs is spite and $60 worth of drone parts." I sat down, gripping my mug. "What do we do?" He grinned like a man who'd been waiting all night for that question. "We bait the trap one last time." He spent the next 2 days building what he affectionately called our final counter-offensive, a phrase that made me nervous every single time he said it. The plan involved props, documents, fake zoning permits, even a borrowed cement mixer from a guy named Reggie who owed Hank a favor after a mysterious incident involving squirrels. By the end of the day, the front yard of our home looked like a construction site designed by someone mildly unhinged. Caution tape, safety cones, a mock blueprint taped to a stake, and an enormous binder labeled "Illegal Modifications, Confidential." It was, without question, the least subtle trap in the history of traps, but Hank beamed at it proudly. "Son," he said, hands on hips, "this is irresistible bait. She sees something this messy, this unauthorized, this unregulated, she'll lose her ever-loving mind." I glanced at the ridiculous display. "Dad, this is either going to catch her or summon the city inspector," he shrugged. "Either way, problem gets solved." That night, we waited. The sky darkened, the cicadas hummed, the streetlights buzzed with faint electric halos. Midnight came and went. I began to think Hank had been wrong, that Lauren was gone for good, that maybe she'd finally been silenced by her own downfall. Then I heard it, a soft mechanical hum, faint but deliberate, a sound I wouldn't have recognized a week ago. Hank mouthed the word, "drone." We crept to the window. A sleek black quadcopter glided overhead, blinking softly, scanning our absurdly staged construction zone. The small camera on its underside tilted, recording everything. "She took the bait," Hank whispered. The drone hovered lower, slid sideways, paused in front of the blueprint stake. "Now," Hank hissed. I pressed the concealed button on the remote. From beneath a lawn gnome, one Hank had hollowed out with a hammer and a carving knife. That morning, a spring-loaded net launcher fired upward with surprising force. The net unfolded mid-air, capturing the drone like a metallic fly in a spider web. It spiraled downward, buzzing frantically. Before landing in a tangled heap on the grass, Hank pumped a fist. Tactical success. The drone twitched weakly. Its propellers slowed until they finally whirred to a stop. I couldn't believe it. "We actually caught it." "Of course we did," Hank said. "Never underestimate the power of strategic lawn decor." We brought the drone inside, placing it carefully on the dining table. Hank produced a screwdriver like a surgeon preparing for an operation. "Let's see what our lovely fugitive's been up to." Inside were memory cards, 3 of them. We plugged them into my laptop, and slowly, the files loaded. The first contained aerial footage, hours of it of various homes in the neighborhood, private yards, driveways, windows. The second contained documents, drafted violation letters, new proposed shadow HOA bylaws, lists of residents labeled non-compliant, watch list, and risk factors. But the third contained something else entirely, something personal. A folder labeled Coal Contingency. My chest tightened. I clicked it open. Inside was a detailed blueprint of our house, notes about our routines, screenshots from our own security cameras recorded before Lauren was removed, and worst of all, a document titled Restoration Plan. It detailed how Lauren intended to regain control of Cedar Ridge Meadows, not through the board, not through elections, but through fear, through anonymous warnings, through phantom violations no one could trace, through slow, measured chaos. Hank's jaw tightened. She wasn't going to stop until someone stopped her. "What do we do now?" I whispered. He stood, lifted the drone in one hand like a trophy, and said, "We end this, permanently." At dawn, Hank walked up Lauren's driveway with the drone in one hand and a bakery box in the other. He placed it neatly on her doorstep. Inside the box were every false violation she drafted, tied with a ribbon, plus a note, "From your biggest fans, retire." 2 days later, her house was empty. No moving truck, no goodbye note, no new address filed with the HOA. She simply vanished. Some said she left for Florida. Some said she moved to a neighborhood with no HOA, so she could heal. Hank said she probably joined a witness protection program for overzealous suburban tyrants. But Cedar Ridge Meadows, it finally woke up, finally took a breath, finally felt like a neighborhood again instead of a monitored compound. And Hank, well, he became the unofficial guardian of the block, advising the newly reformed HOA with one rule carved into the Constitution: no surveillance, no secret notes, no tyranny. I thought it was finished, truly finished. But I was wrong, again, because as we cleaned the garage one quiet afternoon, Hank pulled a metal lunchbox from behind the water heater. Inside was a cassette tape labeled, "For When It's Over." He popped it into an old player. Lauren's voice filled the garage. "You'll miss me," she said. "One day, this neighborhood will fall apart without someone keeping it in line." Hank paused the tape, looked at me, and laughed so hard he had to sit down. Then he tossed the cassette into the trash. "Son," he said, "I think Cedar Ridge Meadows will be just fine." The weeks following Lauren's disappearance were some of the strangest, most liberating days Cedar Ridge Meadows had ever experienced. It was as if someone had lifted a heavy, invisible tarp off the entire neighborhood. You could feel it in the air, the relief, the looseness, the subtle joy of a community rediscovering itself. Within days, the HOA's interim board scheduled an emergency meeting not to impose new rules, but to dismantle old ones. They invited every resident, and for once people showed up eagerly, carrying folding chairs and homemade snacks instead of complaints. You could tell folks were excited because even Gary from Lot 14 brought brownies, and he hadn't willingly participated in anything since 2009. The meeting began with an almost ceremonial purge. Residents took turns reading the most absurd, petty, unnecessary rules Lauren had created over her reign, then tearing them up with cathartic ferocity. Every rip felt like a small victory. No garden gnome taller than 8 inches, Rip. No wind chimes audible from more than 10 feet away. Snip. No inflatable holiday decorations for more than 48 consecutive hours. Shred. By the time they finished, there was enough confetti on the ground to supply a parade. And then, something remarkable happened. People began talking to each other, really talking. Neighbors who had barely exchanged nods over the years now swapped stories, shared frustrations, laughed over old finds. It was healing, communal, and strangely beautiful. You could feel the neighborhood knitting itself together, thread by thread. The transformation didn't end there. Someone suggested hosting a block party to celebrate Cedar Ridge's newfound freedom. That suggestion turned into a group text. The group text turned into a sign-up sheet. And the sign-up sheet turned into one of the biggest events Cedar Ridge Meadows had ever seen. I was grilling burgers by noon, and by 2 o'clock the entire street was buzzing like a summer festival. Kids zipped around on scooters, adults mingled with drinks in hand. Someone set up a bounce house that looked dangerously oversized for the street, but nobody protested because, well, there was no one left to issue a violation. And then, like a man born for the moment, Hank emerged from our house wearing a sash someone had crafted out of an old bedsheet. It read, "Neighborhood Hero." On his head was a crown made from a pie tin, spray-painted gold. He walked down the middle of Cedar Ridge like a conquering general returning from battle. The neighbors cheered and clapped. Someone even saluted. Hank acted humble for approximately 3 seconds before fully leaning into it, posing for photos, giving exaggerated thumbs-ups, and blessing barbecue plates like he was presiding over a feast. I swear I saw him sign autographs at one point, not that anyone asked him to. It was the happiest I'd seen him in years, maybe ever. But just as the celebration reached its peak, kids screaming joyfully, adults dancing near portable speakers, the scent of grilled food wafting through the air. Something strange cut through the noise. A soft buzzing, high, mechanical, sharp enough to slice through the laughter. I frowned, stepping away from the grill. "Dad," I called. "Do you hear that?" Hank's head snapped up instantly. "Oh, I hear it." The buzzing grew louder, circling the park area where the bounce house stood. People began turning, craning their necks upward. A few kids pointed. "That's not a bird," one boy said. "That's not a plane." Another added dramatically. "It wasn't either. It was a drone, not the cheap kind you buy for your nephew's Christmas gift. This was sleek, black, fast professional, high-end, the kind Lauren would absolutely buy if she were trying to establish an underground surveillance empire." For a moment, the entire block froze. Someone whispered, "Is that hers?" Another person gasped, "She's back." The drone dipped lower, hovering directly above the bounce house. Its camera whirred, angling downward to capture the crowd. Parents pulled their kids closer. People stepped under trees, shielding their faces. Even the music sputtered to a stop. Hank didn't duck. He didn't flinch. He just stood perfectly still, eyes narrowed, jaw tightening. And then, in an act so confidently absurd that only a man like Hank could pull it off, he grabbed a loaf of French bread from the snack table, wound up like a baseball pitcher, and hurled it at the drone. The bread sailed majestically through the air like a dry, doughy torpedo, and missed the drone by a solid 3 feet. But the crowd erupted in cheers anyway, because in that moment, Hank wasn't just a retired veteran. He was defiance in human form. The drone zipped higher, retreated, and vanished over the rooftops. Just as quickly as it had arrived, people looked shaken, confused, some angry, some scared. Hank simply wiped his hands and said, "Well, looks like she's still got batteries." The joke didn't land, not fully, because beyond the humor was a truth we all felt but didn't want to say out loud. Lauren might have lost the HOA, but she hadn't lost her obsession with Cedar Ridge Meadows. That night, after the block party ended and people drifted home full of sugar and new hope, Hank and I sat on the back porch. The air was warm and quiet, the kind of stillness you only get after a long, exhausting day. He flipped through an old notebook, muttering under his breath, "She's planning something." That drone wasn't a warning shot, it was a checkpoint. I sighed. "Dad, she's gone. Maybe she just left some tech behind. And maybe squirrels can do taxes," Hank replied. "But I don't bet on it." A few days passed, and then the notes started appearing. Not official, HOA notices, not typed, not signed, anonymous notes, poorly disguised copies of Lauren's usual violations, left on doorsteps. stuffed into mailboxes, wedged between porch railings, unapproved decoration. One read, trash bins visible from the street, wind chimes exceed volume standards. One particularly ridiculous notice read, grass appears aggressively green, residents panicked. Had Lauren returned? Was she operating in secret? Was a new tyrant rising to take her place? No one knew, but Hank had a theory. A wounded tyrant doesn't retreat, he said. She hides, regroups, and tries to take her power back. He was right. She was testing the waters, seeing who would obey, who would fear her again. But she underestimated Cedar Ridge, because that time, no one obeyed, no one paid fines, no one removed their decorations, no one cowered. Instead, they united and brought every note straight to our porch, where Hank collected them like trading cards. He tapped the growing stack proudly. This, son, is evidence of desperation. But one question remained. How was she still spying? The answer came 2 days later, when General Honk, the neighborhood's unofficial mascot, and Naya's beloved emotional support goose, started honking aggressively at our front yard. The goose had never liked Lauren. He had impeccable instincts. Hank stepped outside, following the bird's gaze upward. Another drone, not hovering this time, stationary. Hidden in the branches of my elm tree like a mechanical vulture, Hank didn't hesitate. Fetch the gnome, the ridiculous, brilliant, deranged lawn gnome launcher Hank had built in secret as a just-in-case contingency. We retrieved it from the shed, a garden statue hollowed out, modified, and fitted with a spring-loaded net cannon. It was equal parts tactical ingenuity and absolute madness. We positioned the gnome, took aim, and waited for the drone to shift just enough. Hank whispered, 3, 2, now. I pressed the trigger. The net shot upward with surprising force, wrapping around the drone in midair. It sputtered, spun, and plummeted onto the lawn with a metallic thud. We grabbed it, dismantled it, and found everything we expected and a few things we didn't. Inside was a memory card containing dozens of drafted violation notes, a partially completed set of bylaws titled HOA 2.0, and a file named Reclaim Strategy. She hadn't given up, she wasn't going to. Lauren had been trying to rebuild her empire from the shadows, so Hank decided to send her a message. He printed every single false violation she'd drafted, tied them with a bright red ribbon, dropped them into a cake box, and left it on her porch at dawn with a handwritten note. Nice try. Retire. 2 days later, her house was empty. Again, only this time, she didn't come back. Her car vanished, her curtains were gone, her mailbox emptied, her presence erased. Cedar Ridge Meadows could finally breathe. The HOA reformed itself into something humane, transparent, even friendly. Residents volunteered their time, meetings became collaborative instead of combative, and Hank, despite refusing all leadership roles, became a revered advisor, earning lifetime cinnamon roll privileges at every committee gathering. Life returned to normal, but not the old normal, a better normal, one built on trust, community, and shared resilience. Weeks later, while cleaning the garage, the same garage where this entire saga began, we found something wedged behind the water heater, a metal lunchbox. Inside was a cassette tape labeled, "For When It's Over." We listened to it. Lauren's voice crackled through the speaker, dramatic as ever. "You'll miss me," she said. "One day this neighborhood will fall apart without someone keeping it in line." Hank stopped the tape, chuckled, rewound it just to hear the absurdity again, then tossed the cassette into the trash. "Son," he said, patting my shoulder, "what keeps a neighborhood in line isn't fear, it's people looking out for each other." And with that, Cedar Ridge Meadows closed the final chapter of the Lauren era, not with bitterness, but with laughter, unity, and a very smug goose honking proudly in the background. When I look back on everything, every truck, every violation, every drone, every moment of absurd chaos, I realize something powerful. Neighborhoods aren't held together by rules. They're held together by people. Not perfect people, not always agreeable people, but people who show up for each other, people who stand together when something is wrong, people who refuse to let fear dictate how they live. Lauren thought control kept a community functioning, but it was trust that saved Cedar Ridge Meadows, trust between neighbors, trust that we'd speak up, trust that we'd protect each other's peace when it mattered. So if you've ever felt powerless in your own community, remember this: You're stronger when you stand together. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA gone wild, well, tell us your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next battle for suburban sanity.